There is a house built out of stone, with wooden floors, walls and windowsills, with tables and chairs worn by all of the dogs. And this is a place where I don't feel alone, and this is a place where I feel like home.
Good morning, everyone. It is wonderful to see everybody in here. I've really missed getting to spend this 9:30 hour with y'all on these past two Sunday mornings, so it's great to be back, and I appreciate everybody being with me this morning. Just a quick update, several of you asked about Ada. We are home now. Ronald McDonald House is a thing of the past. She's doing great. She's already up to 7 pounds 9 ounces, so she's doing wonderful. And she and Mom are both doing well, and they send their regrets for not being able to be here, but they're looking forward to being back and plugged in with all of us here soon. So anyway, even though we've had a 2-week hiatus, in the first 6 weeks that we were together, really what we discussed was how we were designed to be in relationship with God and with one another. And today I want to move forward in our study and expand on that by looking at what it means for us to say that we love others. What does that mean? We talk about it a lot, but what does it mean? And to enter into this discussion, I want to begin by playing a song called Moments by the country band Emerson Drive. And I want us to carefully listen to the lyrics, and I want us to also carefully consider the story that's being narrated in this song. So again, this is a song called Moments by the band Emerson Drive.
I was coming to the end of a long, long walk when a man crawled out of a cardboard box under the East Street Bridge, followed me onto it. I went out halfway across with that homeless shadow tagging along, so I dug for some change. Wouldn't need it anyway. He took it looking just a bit ashamed. He said, you know, I haven't always been this way. I've had my moments, days in the sun moments. I was second to none moments when I knew I did what I thought I couldn't do. Like that plane ride coming home from the war that summer. My son was born, memories like a coat so warm the cold wind can't get through. Looking at me now, you might not know it, but I've had my moments. Well, I stood there trying to find my nerve, wondered if a single soul on earth would care at all. Miss me when I'm gone. That old man just kept hanging around, looking at me, looking down. I think he recognized that look in my eyes. Standing with him there, I felt ashamed. I said, you know, I haven't always been this way. I've had my moments, days in the sun moments. I was second to none moments when I knew I did what I thought I couldn't do. fire tonight. That old man tells his story one more time. He says, I've had my moments, days in the sun, moments I was second to none, moments when I knew I did what I thought I couldn't do. Like that cool night on the East Street Bridge when a young man almost ended it. I was right there, wasn't scared of being I held to pull it true. Looking at me now, you might not know it. Oh, looking at me now, you might not know it. I've had my moments. I've had my moments. I've had my moments.
I love that song. Looking at me now, you might not know it, but I've had my moments. To me, this is a really moving and really emotionally effective song. It, in my opinion, uses just the right measure of pathos to communicate one of the easiest things in life for us to overlook. And that is how we're all at our core the same. How no matter our station in life, no matter what we've been through, how at our core, we're all built the same. What's more, it spells this lesson out by pointing to the emotions that definitively remind us of this truth of sadness, of loss, of doubt, of hurt, of pain. And it's reminiscent of that famous Shakespeare quote from The Merchant of Venice, if you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? In other words, we're all in it together, bound by our shared humanity, and nothing reminds us more of our shared humanity than recognizing in others the same limitations that we ourselves have. These emotions that I just listed, sadness, hurt, doubt, loss, pain, that's what those are. Those are limitations. Those are limitations, and we can't avoid them, no matter how hard we try to construct lives that will shield us from them. Eventually, those emotions are going to visit us. Thus, to connect with others on this level of sadness and hurt and doubt and fear, this cements a much more abiding relationship than a connection on a much more surface, easy, pleasing level, because when connecting on the level of our recognized finitude, on the recognition of our limitation, when connecting on that level, our real us connects to the other. Not our constructed self, not the image that we produce, but the real us connects with the other. And we can all relate to these sentiments. We can relate to what's being addressed in the song. We can relate to the sentiments as named because we've all been there in some shape or fashion. Perhaps not to the physical breaking point that the character in our song is experiencing, but we've all been through extreme hurt, extreme trial. Through trials that have left us confused, and angry, bitter, or scared. And before we move forward this morning, it's imperative that I point out we seldom know when the person who's sitting next to us has been through or is currently going through one of those moments. We seldom, if ever, know that. We should reflect on that. Because more than anything that we discussed this morning, I think this is one of the most important things for us to remember. We seldom know what others and the extent to what others have been through, or even what they're going through right this second. And we have a natural tendency to assess others and judge others and form opinions based on the limited perspective that we have of them, on the persona that they are either consciously or unconsciously presenting to the world. But this persona that we're all presenting to one another, this never gives us a true look at who the other person is and what the other person's going through. It never tells us the whole story because it's constructed to not tell us the whole story. We construct the image and the persona that we give other people for the very reason that we want to hide the painful things that we'd rather not publicize to the whole world. The shameful things, the hurtful things, the confusing things. But we're going to come back to this idea. Now, though, I want to quickly look at Luke 6. And as we do, I want us to focus on the imperative that's given here by Jesus to love others. This is Luke 6, beginning in verse 27. Jesus speaking. But to you who are listening, I say, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on the cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Give to everyone who asks, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. No, but love your enemies. Do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you'll be children of the Most High, because He is kind to the ungrateful. I want to look one more time at this specific passage in here. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? With this in mind, I want to read a passage from Fyodor Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov. We read from this book several weeks ago, and this morning I want to look at an earlier portion of the scene that we read in that week. In this passage, we have a woman who has come before an elderly priest. He's dying. He's well respected by the community. And she comes to him, and she's talking about her inability to practice active love. And she says to him, "You see, I so love humanity that, would you believe it, I often dream of forsaking all that I have and becoming a sister of mercy. I close my eyes and I think and I dream, and at that moment I feel full of strength to overcome all obstacles. No wounds, no festering sores could at that moment frighten me. I would bind them up and wash them with my own hands. I would nurse the afflicted. I would be ready to kiss such wounds." And the priest looks at her and he says, "This is much, and it's good that your mind is full of these dreams and not others. Sometime unaware you may do a good deed in reality." To which the woman comes back, "Yes, but could I endure such a life for long? That's the chief question. That's my most agonizing question. I shut my eyes and I ask myself, would you persevere long on that path? And if the patient whose wounds you are washing did not meet you with gratitude, but worried you with his whims, without valuing or remarking your charitable services, began abusing you and rudely commanding you and complaining to your superiors, what then? Would you persevere in your love or not? And do you know, I came with horror to the conclusion that if anything could dissipate my love to humanity, it would be ingratitude. In short, I am a hired servant. I expect my payment at once, that is, praise, and the repayment of love with love. Otherwise, I am incapable of loving anyone." Let me read that last little part one more time. One more time. She said, "And do you know, I came with horror to the conclusion that if anything could dissipate my love to humanity, it would be ingratitude. In short, I am a hired servant. I expect my payment at once, that is, praise, and the repayment of love with love. Otherwise, I am incapable of loving anyone." To me, this is one of the most trenchant passages in all of literature as it pertains to our selfish nature, of how we, even in our efforts at doing good, can still be driven by these underlying selfish motivations. For Dostoevsky's characters here, we're seeking self-worth even in the ostensibly selfless things that we do. Even more, Dostoevsky's saying that in the moments we find ourselves most in love with humanity, with the idea of being a loving person, that's when we feel the most distaste for the particular individuals around us. We talked about that a few weeks ago, about the difference between general love and particular love. And this is what Dostoevsky's talking about. He's talking about separating the ideal of loving others with the practice of loving others. Again, just as we spoke about a couple weeks ago. So then the question is this. We understand the mandate given us in Luke 6. We understand that Jesus is here telling us that we're to love others. And I really think that we sincerely, on our better days, want to follow this command. But then we bump up against either A, a feeling of hostility toward those we're supposed to love, which happens a lot, at least in my life, or B, a realization that selfish motivation, not pure intention, is somehow underlying our efforts at being selfless. And this being the case, question then is how can we truly, genuinely expect to be able to love other people? And that is the age-old question. And now, as we move forward with this age-old question, it goes without saying, but I'm going to go ahead and say it just in case you don't realize that I'm aware of this. I don't have the market cornered on the answer to this question. I don't have the market cornered. So what I'm going to say from here forward doesn't mean that I have all the answers, but these are some ideas that I've been grappling with for some time. And the first place that I'd start in this discussion is by highlighting the need to distinguish the difference between loving others and liking others. This is the starting point to me because I think it's very easy to assume that the two are the same. It's very easy to assume that the two are the same. And so when we feel convicted that we need to do a better job of liking others, what we then try to do is engender in ourselves a feeling of affection for certain people for whom, honestly, we don't feel natural affection. And that can be caught between a rock and a hard place in that moment. But C.S. Lewis gives us a key, I think, to better understanding this situation. He breaks this difference down very nicely in Mere Christianity. Lewis writes, quote, "Our love of ourselves does not mean that we always like ourselves. It means that we wish our own good. In the same way, love for our neighbors is quite a different thing from liking or affection. We like or are fond of some people and not others. It's important to understand that this natural liking is neither a sin nor a virtue. It's just a fact. But of course, what we do about it is either sinful or virtuous." And he goes on with this line of thought, and I'm actually going to pick up reading directly from the book here because it's material that's well worth our time, I think. Lewis continues, he says, "But though natural liking should normally be encouraged, it would be quite wrong to think that the way to become charitable is to sit trying to manufacture affectionate feelings. Some people are cold by temperament. That may be a misfortune for them, but it's no more a sin than having a bad digestion is a sin. It does not cut them out from the chance or excuse them from the duty of learning charity. The rule for all of us is perfectly simple. Do not waste time bothering whether you love your neighbor. Act as if you did. As soon as we do this, we find one of the great secrets. When you're behaving as if you loved someone, you will presently come to love them. If you injure someone you dislike, you will find yourself disliking them even more. If you do someone a good turn, you will find yourself disliking them less. There is indeed, though, one exception. If you do someone a good turn, not to please God and obey the law of charity, but rather to show that person what a fine and forgiving person you are, and to put them in your debt, and then sit down and wait for their gratitude, you'll probably be disappointed. People are not fools. They have a very quick eye for anything like showing off or patronage. Whenever we do good to another self, just because it is a self made like us by God, and desiring its own happiness as we desire ours, we shall have learned to love it a little more, or at least to dislike it a little less. So here we see Lewis arguing that the more we incline ourselves toward others, the more we slowly come to assume the very feelings that we were at first simply trying to imitate. Then toward the end of the Lewis passage, we see a warning about what happens to the person who does this not for selfless reasons, but like in the Brothers Karamazov passage, does it for self-gain. The writer and pastor Tim Keller, he puts all of this in a slightly different way in his book, The Reason for God, which is a wonderful book, as are both of these that I read, by the way. I recommend all of those. And Keller claims that there are two ways that we dodge practicing the true selfless love that we're called to practice. He calls them the two forms of self-centeredness. Number one, he says that we avoid selfless love purposely by overtly refusing to engage in it, by owning our own selfishness and saying, in effect, it is what it is. It is what it is. Or number two, and the more subtle he claims, is by being very good, keeping all the rules, and in so doing unconsciously becoming self-righteous. The problem with this route, Keller claims, is that here we're trying to earn God's grace. Unconsciously, we are trying to earn God's grace. And to make his point, Keller quotes this really incisive passage from Flannery O'Connor's novel Wise Blood, where the protagonist, Hazel Motes, quote, knew that the best way to avoid Jesus was to avoid sin. In other words, O'Connor's character, Hazel Motes, was operating under this legal code that suggested that if he upheld his end of the law, God then was responsible for providing him grace. Now, I would venture to guess that very few of us look at life and at grace this way. But I dare say that many of us have a default understanding that this is how it works. I know I do. My default, even though I can sit up here and say that I know this isn't how grace works, my default is to see God and me as buddies who are trading favors with one another. And the more good I do, the more God's going to allow to happen in my life. That it's an exchange there. This is problematic for a whole host of reasons. But chief among them is that it exposes me as selfish. It's under the belief that I'm somehow capable of earning God's favor through things that I do. And this, I'm sorry to admit, is just a fancy way of defining pride. And here's C.S. Lewis's take on that matter. Y'all know I like C.S. Lewis, so you're getting a lot of C.S. Lewis's. Lewis says, in God you come up against something which is in every respect immeasurably superior to yourself. Unless you know God as that, and therefore know yourself as nothing in comparison, you don't really know God at all. As long as you're proud, you cannot know God. A proud man is always looking down on things and people. And, of course, as long as you're looking down, you can't see something that's above you. And this raises a terrible question. How is it that people who are quite obviously eaten up with pride can say they believe in God and appear to themselves very religious? I'm afraid it means they're worshiping an imaginary God. They theoretically admit themselves to be nothing in the presence of this phantom God, but are really all the time imagining how he approves of them and thinks them far better than ordinary people. That is, they pay a pennyworth of imaginary humility to him and get out of it a pound's worth of pride towards their fellow men. I suppose it was of those people Christ was thinking when he said that some would preach about him and cast out devils in his name, only to be told at the end of the world that he had never really known them. That's a tough passage to read, but it's a cutting and insightful passage to read, I think. And the aforementioned Southern short story writer and novelist Flannery O'Connor deals with this same theme a lot in her stories. I don't know if any of y'all have ever read Flannery O'Connor, but she's one of the great American short story writers. And she really wrestles with and looks closely at this theme of the righteous being sinners and the sinners being righteous. She, O'Connor, was famous for her grotesque characters. And by grotesque, I don't mean their physical appearance, but she would over-exaggerate her characters and their proclivities in these evil and unsightly ways so as to make the subtle truths of her story more apparent for her reader. And in one of her most famous stories, called Revelation, a character named Mrs. Turpin and her husband Claude are in the waiting room of a doctor's office. And as Mrs. Turpin sits there, the narration shows her silently watching and judging everyone sitting around her. Nothing outrageous, just sitting quietly, and we get to have access to her inner mind, and she's sizing up everyone sitting around her, sizing them up. And meanwhile, we see her finding herself superior in one way or another to everyone in the room. Soon enough, she strikes up a conversation with one of the women waiting beside her, and as Mrs. Turpin talks, the more and more apparent it is to the reader just how proud Mrs. Turpin is of herself. How refined and how proper and how full of dignity she feels she is in comparison to the rest of the people sitting around her. All the while that she's talking to this woman, though, the other woman's daughter, whose name is Mary Grace, which is an important metaphor in the story, all the while they're talking, Mary Grace has been scowling at Mrs. Turpin, just this evil scowl. Finally, Mrs. Turpin says, as she's continuing on in this conversation with the woman, she says, if it's one thing I am, it's grateful. When I think of all of who I could have been besides myself and what all I got, I just feel like shouting, thank you, Jesus. Thank you for making everything the way it was. It could have been different. Oh, thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Anybody ever known anybody like Mrs. Turpin? At that moment, Mary Grace, the daughter who has been eyeing Mrs. Turpin and scowling the whole time, she explodes. She hurls her book at her, which this book is called Human Development, by the way. She hurls her book at her, and it comes crashing across the table, and she begins to choke Mrs. Turpin. And then Mary Grace then goes into an epileptic fit. And Mrs. Turpin, at some level realizing that the girl is a messenger of God, trying to communicate something to her, she looks back down at this girl and says, what have you got to say to me? Mary Grace, with these eyes that are on fire, looks up at her and says, go back to hell where you came from, you old warthog. And this is the revelation that the story's title is referring to. It was revealed to Mrs. Turpin that she was no better than a warthog. And thus the last part of the story is Mrs. Turpin trying to wrap her head around having been communicated this very idea. Later that night, she's alone out by her own hog pen. And she says to God, what do you send me a message like that for? How am I a hog and me both? She pauses and then says, there's no trash around here that I haven't given to. And break my back to the bone every day working and do for the church too. She pauses again and thinks about the scene in the waiting room, and then she goes on, how am I a hog? Huh? Exactly how am I like them? There was plenty of trash in that room. It didn't have to be me you sent that message to. If you like trash, better go get yourself some trash then. You could have made me trash. If trash is what you wanted, why didn't you make me some? I could quit working and take it easy and be filthy like them, lounge about on the sidewalks all day drinking root beer, dip snuff and spit in every puddle, have it all over my face. I could be nasty. Then she starts yelling. She says, go on, call me a hog. Call me a hog again. Who do you think you are? Who do you think you are, she says. And then here's how that story concludes. Page 5 or so. In the deepening light, everything was taking on a mysterious hue. The pasture was growing a peculiar glassy green, and the streak of highway had turned lavender. She braced herself for a final assault, and this time her voice rolled out over the pasture. Go on, she yelled. Call me a hog. Call me a hog again. A garbled echo returned to her. A final surge of fury shook her, and she roared, Who do you think you are? The color of everything, field and crimson sky, burned for a moment with a transparent intensity. The question carried over the pasture and across the highway and the cotton field, and returned to her clearly, like an answer from beyond the wood. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out of it. So Mrs. Turpin stood there, her gaze fixed on the highway, all her muscles rigid. Then, like a monumental statue coming to life, she bent her head slowly and gazed, as if through the very heart of mystery, down into the pig parlor at the hogs. They had settled all in one corner around the old sow who was grunting softly. A red glow suffused them, and they appeared to pant with a secret life. Until the sun slipped finally behind the tree line, Mrs. Turpin remained there with her gaze bent to the hogs, as if she were absorbing some abysmal, life-giving knowledge. At last she lifted her head. There was only a purple streak in the sky, cutting through a field of crimson and leading, like an extension of the highway, into the descending dusk. She raised her hands from the side of the pen in a gesture hieratic and profound. A visionary light settled in her eyes. She saw the streak as a vast swinging bridge extending upward from the earth through a field of living fire. Upon it a vast horde of souls were rumbling toward heaven. There were whole companies of freaks and lunatics shouting and clapping and leaping like frogs. And bringing up the end of the procession was a tribe of people whom she recognized at once as those who, like herself and her husband Claude, had always had a little of everything and the God-given wit to use it right. She leaned forward to observe them closer. They were marching behind the others with great dignity, accountable as they had always been for good order and common sense and respectable behavior. They alone were on key. Yet she could see by their shocked and altered faces that even their virtues were being burned away. She lowered her hands and gripped the rail of the hog pen, her eyes small but fixed unblinkingly on what lay ahead. In a moment the vision faded, but she remained where she was, immobile. At length she got down and turned off the faucet and made her slow way on the darkening path to the house. In the woods around her the invisible cricket choruses had struck up, but what she heard were the voices of the souls climbing upward into the starry field and shouting hallelujah. This is a really profound story. Tough story, really profound story. I particularly love the moment of this story on which the whole meaning, the whole purpose of the story hinges, and that's when Mrs. Turpin looks into the hog pen and, quote, like a monumental statue coming to life, she bent her head slowly and gazed, as if through the very heart of mystery, down into the pig parlor at the hogs. They had all settled in one corner around the old sow who was grunting softly. A red glow suffused them. They appeared to pant with a secret life. Peered through the very heart of mystery, O'Connor says. Suddenly Mrs. Turpin saw the old sow grunting softly, her babies feeding around her, and she saw the tie that connected her to those hogs that she felt such contempt for. She realized that when everything else fades, she was no different from anyone else. That, like that song Moments suggests, that at her very root, just as at all of our very roots, she was dependent. Like those little baby pigs on their mother, she was dependent. That she was not self-sufficient. That she too was capable of both extreme good and extreme bad. I watched this great movie not terribly long ago called The Sunset Limited. It's based on a Cormac McCarthy play. And it's with Samuel L. Jackson and Tommy Lee Jones. And they just sit in one room for 90 minutes. And it is a display of acting, I tell you what. I didn't know that this movie had come out. I stumbled upon it by accident. It's really, really good. Some of the best dialogue ever. It doesn't end very hopefully. I'll go ahead and give you that disclaimer now if you choose to watch it. But it's some really, really great dialogue about philosophical and theological ideas. But in that movie, there was this very powerful line that speaks to this very idea, this lesson that Mrs. Turpin had to learn. And in it, Samuel L. Jackson looks at Tommy Lee Jones and says, you might not like those other people, but that doesn't mean you are not like those other people. What a wonderful line. You might not like those other people. That doesn't mean that you are not like those other people. Whoever those other people are, whoever that other person that you just find it in yourself difficult to engender natural affection for, you might not like that other person. But that doesn't mean that you are not like that other person. As Lewis says, pride is when we don't see ourselves as infinitesimal in comparison to God. When we think that on our own natural goodness is sufficient. I've said before in here, and I'll say it again, I've always been really moved by a line from an incredibly popular country music song by that singer, Leanne Womack. And you're all going to be familiar with this song. It plays all the time on all kinds of radio stations. In her song, I Hope You Dance, there's this one specific lyric that is just so powerful. She says, I hope you still feel small when you stand beside the ocean. Anytime I go to the beach, which is far less frequent than I'd like, but anytime I go to the beach and I look out over the ocean, I think about that line. And I think how powerful that is. I hope you still feel small when you stand beside the ocean. I think that in life it's so easy to buy into the lie that we're capable of generating our own goodness, that we're capable of earning God's love and grace, that we're capable of being our own Savior, and that when we perceive something good in ourselves, to take credit for that ourselves. The problem with living under this, what I believe to be a misconception, is that we, without realizing it, begin to feel superior to others. Could be a group of others, could be an individual other. But when we live under this misconception, we unintentionally begin to feel superior to others. And as soon as those feelings of superiority set in, we can then be certain that there's nothing really humble about our faith. As Lewis says, we can then reflect on the fact that perhaps we've momentarily reverted back into worshiping an imaginary God. that, as Lewis says, we, quote, theoretically admit ourselves to be nothing in the presence of this phantom God, but are really all the time imagining how he approves of us and thinks us far better than other people. It's these very feelings of superiority to and of perceived disconnection with those around us that prevents us from genuinely reaching out, meeting people where they are, because it's where we are, where we've been, and in so doing, loving them and being loved in return. Thomas Merton, one of the most profound Christian thinkers of the 20th century, once wrote, "Our job is to love others without stopping to inquire whether or not they're worthy of it. That's not our business, and in fact, it's nobody's business. What we're asked to do is to love, and this love itself will render both ourselves and our neighbors worthy." Luke 6 one more time says, "If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to other sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back." Love others, Jesus tells us. But do we? And if so, how often? We've all had our moments. Good and bad. We've all had our moments. We've definitely had our moments of loving others, but the question is this: how do we experience those moments more frequently? And it seems to me that the key is in recognizing that, like Samuel L. Jackson's character tells Tommy Lee Jones in the Sunset Limited, recognizing that we may not like that particular other person, that doesn't mean that at our core we're not like that other person. That's the place to start. And according to Lewis, this little bit of humility before others and before God will go miles in helping us learn what it means to love and be connected to others and to God, because that's what we were made for. And that's what I have for this morning. And we'll try again to open it up for discussion. We were able to generate some good discussion the last week before we went on that 2-week break. Does anybody have any thoughts on this? Any criticisms? Any places where I'm glaringly wrong?
I worked at an urban renewal project when I was 20 years old as a social worker, and one of my buildings was a rooming house with all mostly drunken old men. And they seemed to come out of nowhere, like they just kind of came up through the cracks in the sidewalk. And then one of them died. And in the newspaper was this huge obituary about where he'd come from.
Mm.
And he lived maybe 3 miles from his family, and his wife, and his children, and his grandchildren. And he'd been a president of a bank. And it was like, didn't come up from the crack in the sidewalk.
Mm.
He fell down through a crack in the sidewalk somewhere.
would,
He was a real man. And it really opened my eyes as to who I was working with and for. And it's amazing when you find out where these people have come from.
absolutely. Thank you for sharing
It
that.
was just,
That's exactly like what the song's saying right there. You know, and in my own life, I have loved ones who have had, song fits to a T. Looking at me now, you might not know it, but I've had my moments. You know, life can do a number on all of us. And it's when we start thinking that it's only going to happen to them and not us that some danger can set in. And that's that superiority and pride that Lewis talks about, and that it's easy to allow to go unchecked because I don't think we intentionally are doing it.
so hard though.
Oh, yeah. I said I don't have the market cornered on it. I just, yeah.
And I kept saying to myself when you were talking, there's a difference between God and me. I'm mortal, he's God. You wonder how far you can go,
Mhm.
you know? But I guess just knowing that that person could be me is enough.
Yeah.
Not all enough. I can't take everybody home with me.
Right, of course.
But that doesn't mean I wouldn't try. But just knowing that they didn't start there.
This came up at our Theology on Tap on Tuesday. I'd mentioned this, and it reminds me of what you just said. And I've said this in one of our Sunday classes in the spring too, but Tim Keller, who I quoted from earlier here, he says that one aspect of our Imago Dei, of saying that we are created in the image of God, is that, like the Trinity, we are designed to be in constant reciprocal relationship. That a hallmark of the Trinity is constant love being generated from the three constituent members to one another, just lavishing love, always awash, the Father always loving the Son and the Holy Spirit, the Son always loving the Father and the Holy Spirit, just this triangle of completely unbroken, pure love. And that in our being created in the image of God, we are relational creatures who were designed to be in unbroken relationship with others. And that when we then look at other people, no matter what the circumstances, it doesn't have to be someone that's fallen off their feet, or that's someone that it can just be someone at work that for whatever reason, the way they blow their nose grates on us. I mean, there's no, in the human condition, there's no end of reasons for why someone rubs us the wrong way, or why we find ourselves not feeling like it's someone that we want to go have dinner with later that evening. But anytime that those moments happen, what Keller's contention is that here we've severed part of that relationship that we're designed to feel, that relationship that we're supposed to have with our fellow creatures, by virtue of the fact that all of us are equally created by God and for God in the image of God. And whenever we begin to think ourselves different and different somehow better, even though seldom do I think we ever reflect on, you know what, not only do I think I'm different than that person, but I think I'm a little better than that person. But implicit in I don't really want to be around that person typically is because I kind of have a better understanding of how I'm supposed to be, than this person. If this person would only act like me, then they'd probably be a little bit, more likable or easy to be around or approachable, or their life would be going better or what have you. And implicit in that would be, you would think, some element of superiority. But the moment that you begin to think that, then you have somehow severed the connection of that relationality. Somehow you're denying at least a fraction of an element of the humanity in that other person. And as the Trinity runs on perfect love for one another, we too are designed to be in relationship with others. That's why in moments of forgiveness and reconciliation, even if suddenly you don't become the best of friends, if that relationship has really been mended, there's growth and wholeness that takes place there, because that's how we were designed to be. Yeah.
You've talked before about, I forget which reference it was, where you like to put people in a box,
Yeah.
and you understand them and you label them as that's the person who likes to read and they like animals, whatever it may be. I think with that we have a default to put in that box, I like them or I don't like them.
Absolutely.
In general. So you have this person that you've labeled as they don't fit in my like category, I don't like them, and so it comes to be that almost everything they say or do, your default is, ugh, that wasn't a nice thing, or I don't like what they said there because they're in my don't like box. So certain people like that, if you just try to say, I'm going to change them to my like box, even though you don't know much about them, make it the default, I'm going to try to like them. Now every new thing they say, you can look at it in a new light and not just default to, that's annoying me, but I may try to like that.
It's well put.
Easier said than done.
Yeah, I like that. And I would also say that when we put people in our like box, that's why we're so shocked when they do something that somehow we don't really like. That, no, I sized you up and you're supposed to be someone, that's in my like box. That's how they quickly get out of the like. No, whoa, how dare you be human? Yeah. Yeah.
I just add one thing to that, but it's not just about the like and I don't like, it's also about vibrations. So if their energy level is higher or lower, let's say they're lower, you're not going to really vibrate with the person because the energy is just not there. Because if you're all hyper, full of energy, bubbly, and the other person is more, you're not really gonna have that connection even when you try to give the person a chance, but the vibration, you know, the energy is not there, it's not really gonna work. I think that's also a factor as well.
I think it's probably definitely a factor. I wonder if when you do see someone whose vibration is different than yours, and if you then determine because of that it's someone that you just don't cotton to. I wonder how much of that too is in an unconscious understanding. Okay, this person's different than me. I don't know. I'm just wondering out loud.
You don't have to be discriminative about that, but maybe it's just, you just don't feel right when you're around that person and you can't explain.
Yeah,
You
definitely.
know what I'm saying? It could be a person who's trying to be your friend, or you're just meeting a person. Could be a stranger on a bus or wherever, and you just want to, like, you know, when you go, have you had that when you go close to a person and you like just want to look away?
Yeah.
Excuse me.
I
You
think
know, or a person is like, ooh, that person has energy.
I think definitely. You know, and I think too that, you know, that our inner not feeling, that's not the way, our inner disposition and the way that we're consciously looking at how we perceive our relationship to someone. Remember, relationship is loose. The person on the bus, there's the relationship there. I mean, you were in proximity to that person, so using our finite English language, the best way to say it is our relationship to them. That's different than the relationship you have to someone else. I think that there's an importance for us in differentiating our conscious way that we feel about someone else from just not apathy, but and I definitely won't say indifference, because I think that, you know, I don't know if y'all know the band The Lumineers, but they have this great line: the opposite of love's indifference. You know, so I don't want to use the word indifference. What I mean is that I think there are times that we might not have negative feelings towards someone. It might not be someone that we're wrestling with not liking. It might just be, like you said, someone that for whatever reason we don't really have. There's no connection, and life's not conspiring in a way that's telling us that they or we really want the connection. I think there's a difference between that and, you know, the person on the bus who's just sitting there, that you're going to get off at the next stop and they're going to get off at the next stop, and your lives aren't going to have any more, you know, effect with one another. And the person that you find yourself just really struggling for whatever reason to like. The person that's in your life somehow, that's at your workplace, or that's, you know, perhaps even in your family, or somehow lives in your apartment complex, someone that is in your world, that there's this, you know it if you're being honest with yourself, this feeling, I'm not really crazy about this person, you know.
But you were talking about, especially, particularly about proud people, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people like that, and even though I say, okay, I give that person a chance, but the way the person is so egoistic, it just, for me, it turns me off, so it's kind of hard to say, you know, I like that person, you know,
Yeah.
or giving a chance when somebody is like pride, you know.
Absolutely, and I think that ties back to Lewis, that the end game isn't to then cement in ourselves a feeling of, okay, yep, I really do like this person, I feel natural affection. Lewis says that when we say that we like ourselves, doesn't mean that we always feel this natural affinity for ourselves. It means that at root we wish ourselves the best, that we hope the best for someone, you know. So it's not necessarily that you can magically suddenly really feel warm, tender feelings towards this person. It's that you engender over time this ability to say, that person continues to grate on me. No matter how many times I reach out, their egotism really does just rub me the wrong way. But still, underneath all that, I wish them the best. You know, I hope good things for them, because at the end of the day, that's, even when we're not crazy about ourselves, when we think, man, my own egotism, you know, if that's the case, is really bothersome. You know, I hope I'm able to hide this from everyone else. You know, still at the end of the day, even though that's grating on you, you still are doing things actively in your life that suggest that you're willing yourself forward and hoping the best for yourself.
Isn't it possible to love somebody without really liking them a whole lot?
Yeah, I think it definitely is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, it's time to go. Thank you all for spending this morning with me.
I hope you never lose your sense of wonder. You get your fill to eat, but always keep that hunger. May you never take one single breath God forbid love ever leave you empty-handed. I hope you still feel small when you stand beside the ocean. Whenever one door closes, I hope one more opens. Promise me that you'll give faith a fighting chance. And when you get the choice to sit it out,